When the first human delegation arrived at the Galactic Council chamber orbiting the blue giant star Terralis, the reaction from the assembled species was not fear or curiosity, but mild amusement. Because humans were latecomers, loud in posture but quiet in power, a species that had barely learned to walk between stars and still relied on crude fusion drives while the elder empires bent gravity like clay. And the Council records already mark humanity as primitive, short-lived, emotionally unstable, and strategically irrelevant, a footnote species that had expanded too fast without permission and would soon be corrected. And standing among the humans was Admiral Jonathan Hale, a man in his late 50s with short gray hair and a calm expression that did not match the dismissive whispers echoing through the chamber, because Hale had spent 4 decades in space warfare, rising from patrol command to fleet strategy, watching alien powers test human borders again and again, probing trade lanes, seizing outposts, and killing civilians while hiding behind council law. And now he stood silently as the Varkesh Empire, rulers of a 1,000-year dominion spanning 6 spiral arms, presented their formal complaint, a demand disguised as protocol, accusing humanity of illegal expansion and resource theft, and the Varkesh speaker, a tall-plated being with glowing eyes and a voice amplified to fill the chamber, declared that Earth must withdraw from 12 contested systems or face enforced compliance, a phrase everyone understood meant invasion, and laughter rippled across several delegations because compliance actions against weaker species were common entertainment, quick wars that reminded the galaxy of its hierarchy, and the council chair formally asked the human delegation to respond, expecting panic or bargaining, but Admiral Hale simply stepped forward and spoke in a steady voice, saying that humanity rejected the claim that the systems were uninhabited and legally settled under exploration accords, and that any hostile action would be considered an act of war, and this only increased the amusement, because the galaxy war was something humans survived, not something they won, and the Varkesh speaker dismissed Hale with a flick of its claw, stating that the Empire had crushed species older and stronger than humanity before Earth had invented radio, and that one human admiral's pride would not change the outcome, and with that the session ended, the threat delivered, the warning ignored, and the humans departed under the gaze of beings who believed the matter settled. But as Hale returned his flagship Resolute, a vessel the Varkesh observers cataloged as outdated and underarmed, he transmitted a single coded message to Earth Command, authorizing the activation of Contingency Doctrine Atlas Black, a plan written decades earlier when humanity first realized the galaxy did not reward fairness. And within hours, shipyards across Seoul and its colonies shifted production priorities. Civilian traffic was quietly rerouted, and fleets that had been listed as training groups or deep space survey units changed course, while the Varkesh Empire moved openly, confident and theatrical, dispatching a suppression armada of hundreds of warships toward the nearest human system, broadcasting their advance as a warning, because fear was part of their strategy, and on human worlds the news spread fast, panic mixed with anger, but also something older and deeper, a collective memory of standing alone against stronger foes. And Hale addressed the Joint Command Council in a secure channel, explaining that the Varkesh believed humans fought like they did, with honor displays, escalation ladders, and limited engagements, and that this belief would end their empire, because humanity had learned through centuries of internal conflict that wars were not won by strength alone, but by ending the enemy's ability to continue. And as the Varkesh fleet crossed into human-claimed space, destroying an unmanned relay station to announce their arrival, Admiral Hale gave the order to proceed with Phase 1. And far from the front lines, deep within Varkesh territory, long dormant human probes activated, machines no larger than cargo pods that had drifted unnoticed for years, attaching themselves to infrastructure hubs, shipyards, and communication relays, while human cyber units began injecting false data into Imperial networks, altering fleet positions, fuel reserves, and command signals. And when the first battle finally occurred at the edge of the Helios system, the Varkesh expected an easy victory, but instead their targeting arrays flickered, their formation commands conflicted, and human ships did not advance in neat lines but scattered, striking from multiple vectors with weapons the Empire had classified as non-viable. Kinetic impactors accelerated to relativistic speeds that ignored shield harmonics and tore through hulls by sheer force, and as the first Varkesh battleship split apart, shock rippled through their command ranks, because no species had ever dared strike them this way. And watching the engagement from his command deck, Admiral Hale did not celebrate, because this was not the victory. This was only the opening move, the moment the galaxy would later point to and say that was when the 1,000-year empire began to die, not with a grand declaration, but with the quiet certainty of one human, Admiral, who had been called primitive and had planned accordingly. As news of the Helios engagement spread through Imperial channels, the Varkesh High Command initially dismissed the loss as an anomaly caused by local interference, because their worldview did not allow for the idea that humans had deliberately engineered a layered deception months in advance. And so the Empire escalated in the only way it knew how, by committing more force, ordering 3 additional armadas to converge on human space, while issuing a public declaration that humanity would be reduced to a client species within one standard cycle, a statement broadcast across the galaxy that many younger civilizations watched with resignation, assuming the usual pattern would play out. But inside the Varkesh capital world of Karos Prime, something far more dangerous was unfolding quietly, because the dormant probes Hale had authorized years earlier were now fully awake, siphoning energy, copying data, and rewriting logistics priorities in ways that appeared normal to automated. Oversight systems and shipyards that should have been producing heavy cruisers began assembling components that subtly weakened structural tolerances, while fuel depots rerouted antimatter shipments to dead drop coordinates that would never be retrieved, and as the Empire pushed outward, it unknowingly hollowed itself from within. And Admiral Hale understood this better than anyone, having spent decades studying how large powers collapse, not from defeat at the edge, but from fracture at the core, and he coordinated with civilian leadership to keep human losses minimal, ordering evacuations of frontier habitats hours before Varkesh bombardments arrived, frustrating Imperial commanders who expected panic, and instead found empty worlds and automated defenses designed to bleed time and resources. And each delay compounded the hidden damage spreading through Varkesh systems, because every ship launched strained supply chains already compromised by human interference. And when a Varkesh Admiral named Krithval announced that he would personally crush the human fleet and President Hale's head to the Council, his flagship suffered a catastrophic reactor failure during transit, killing its entire command crew, an event officially recorded as an accident but privately feared as something worse. And among the elder species, whispers began to circulate that humanity was not fighting a normal war, because normal wars followed rules everyone understood, and this one did not, and Hale leaned into that fear, authorizing limited strikes not against fleets, but against symbols, dismantling relay nexuses that carried Imperial propaganda, exposing evidence of Council corruption to neutral worlds, and offering quiet protection treaties to species long oppressed by the Varkesh, not asking for allegiance, but promising that human fleets would shield them if retaliation came. And one by one, those species began denying the Empire access to ports and repair facilities, citing neutrality, while knowing exactly who was tipping the balance. And as the Varkesh Empire strained to respond on multiple fronts, its ancient command hierarchy, built for obedience, not adaptation, began to crack, with governors arguing over priorities and admirals falsifying reports to avoid blame. And through it all, Admiral Hale remained invisible to the broader galaxy, refusing interviews, declining speeches, issuing orders through secure channels, while allowing the myth to grow that humanity itself was the weapon, an unpredictable force no single mind to control. And this myth terrified the Council far more than any fleet movement, because if one human admiral could destabilize a 1,000-year empire without a formal declaration of total war, then the hierarchy the galaxy relied on was already obsolete. And when the Varkesh finally realized the depth of the sabotage, it was too late, because their fleets were overextended, their shipyards compromised, and their subject species no longer. Afraid, and standing before a holographic map of the collapsing empire, Hale quietly told his staff that the next phase would not be about destruction but demonstration, because the galaxy needed to see not just that the Varkesh could be beaten, but that they could be ended decisively, so that no one would ever again mistake humanity for primitive. By the time the third phase began, the Varkesh Empire was still telling itself that the crisis could be contained, because empires that survived for 1,000 years learned to believe in their own permanence. And the Council archives later showed that even as entire sectors fell silent, the Imperial Court insisted the humans were only winning through trickery that would collapse once exposed. Yet Admiral Hale had anticipated the psychological refusal to adapt and used it as leverage, directing Human fleets not toward conquest, but toward control visibility, appearing suddenly at key junctions, destroying a single Varkesh asset with overwhelming precision, then withdrawing before counterattack could be organized, leaving behind data fragments and sensor ghosts that confused analysis and bred paranoia among commanders, and as a result Varkesh admirals began delaying orders, demanding confirmation that never came, because their communications web was now riddled with human manipulation that subtly altered timestamps and authentication codes, making every message suspect. And on Caro's Prime, the Imperial Senate convened an emergency session where elder lords argued whether the humans should be offered concessions, a move unthinkable days earlier, but pride still ruled, and the Emperor authorized a decisive show of force, ordering the mobilization of the ancestral fleet. Relic warships maintained more for tradition than necessity, vessels whose presence alone had once ended wars without firing a shot. And when these ships emerged from hyperspace near the contested regions, the galaxy watched closely, expecting humanity to retreat. But Hale instead issued a calm directive to engage under observation protocols, ensuring that Council monitoring arrays captured everything, and the battle that followed did not resemble previous clashes. Because human ships did not target hulls or reactors, but command cores and data spines, disabling rather than destroying, leaving massive Varkesh warships drifting powerless. Symbols of authority turned into silent monuments, and this restraint confused the Empire more than annihilation would have, because it forced them to confront defeat without the relief of martyrdom, and as footage spread of ancient Imperial vessels neutralized by what had once been called primitive tactics, neutral species began openly questioning Varkesh dominance, some even sending envoys to Earth seeking clarity on humanity's intentions. And Hale instructed diplomats to speak plainly, saying humans did not seek empire, only security, but would dismantle any power that threatened their survival, a statement that resonated deeply with species long trapped between giants. And inside the Varkesh military, a fracture finally became visible when a regional commander surrendered an entire sector to human custody rather than obey orders he believed would lead to pointless loss, an act considered treason that nonetheless inspired others. And the 1,000-year empire began to unravel not in a single explosion, but in cascading decisions where self-preservation overtook loyalty, and Hale observed these developments with measured caution, knowing that collapse could be more dangerous than resistance if left unmanaged. And so, he prepared the final demonstration, one that would end the war without extermination, by forcing the Varkesh leadership to confront the truth they had avoided since the council chamber, that humanity had never been primitive, only patient, and that one human admiral had used that patience to bring an ancient empire to the edge of ending itself. As the empire slid toward disintegration, Admiral Hale shifted his focus from fleets to minds, because wars between civilizations were ultimately decided by belief rather than firepower, and the Varkesh still believed that if they could strike a single overwhelming blow, the myth of human superiority would collapse. So Hale gave them that opportunity on terms they could not control, selecting the fortified system of Draxel, a region sacred to Varkesh history, and defended by layered weapons, platforms that had never fallen in recorded memory, and he allowed intelligence of human movement toward Draxel to leak through compromised channels, knowing Imperial pride would demand response. And within days, what remained of the Imperial Navy converged there, assembling a force larger than any humanity had yet faced, while the Council broadcast live feeds, expecting a decisive battle that would finally reveal the limits of human power. And Hale ensured those feeds remained uninterrupted, because this was not a trap meant to hide. It was a lesson meant to be seen, and when the fleets met, human ships did not rush forward but formed a wide arc, holding position as if hesitant, and the Varkesh commanders interpreted this as fear, ordering a full advance, activating planet killer arrays and ancient siege cannons. And in that moment, Hale executed the final layer of Atlas Black, activating a network of gravitic anchors seeded years earlier in the system's asteroid belts devices, designed not as weapons but as environmental controls. And space itself seemed to resist the Varkesh advance as their formations stretched and warped. Hyperspace exit points destabilized, and ships emerged misaligned, colliding or drifting helplessly, while human vessels moved freely through corridors they alone understood, striking selectively, disabling command ships, cutting coordination, never breaking formation, never panicking. And as the battle unfolded, the truth became undeniable to every observer that humanity was not reacting but orchestrating. shaping the battlefield at a fundamental level. And on Caro's Prime, the Emperor watched in silence as symbols of imperial invincibility were methodically neutralized, not destroyed in rage, but rendered irrelevant. And for the first time in 1,000 years, a Varkesh ruler issued a retreat order that could not be obeyed because no unified force remained to hear it. And when the last shots faded, Hale ordered all human weapons cold and transmitted an open channel message to the Empire, not a threat, but an assessment, stating calmly that the Varkesh had lost capacity to wage war, that continued resistance would only deepen internal collapse, and that humanity would not pursue annihilation, only compliance with new realities. And this message, carried unfiltered across the galaxy, marked the moment when the 1,000-year empire ended not with a final explosion, but with a quiet acceptance that had been outmatched at every level by a species it had once laughed at. And as the council chamber filled again days later, the laughter was gone, replaced by a careful silence as representatives watched Admiral Hale enter, no longer dismissed as a primitive envoy, but recognized as the man who had ended an empire by understanding it better than it understood itself. In the weeks following the fall of Draxel, Admiral Hale focused on stabilizing the remnants of the Varkesh Empire, because total annihilation was neither necessary nor desired. Humanity's goal had never been conquest, but deterrence, and Hale understood that demonstrating capability without senseless slaughter would echo longer across the galaxy than any display of force could. So fleets moved to enforce ceasefires, isolate rogue commanders, and secure critical infrastructure while simultaneously offering protection to previously subjugated species, creating a network of alliances that had nothing to do with coercion and everything to do with survival. And as Varkesh governors and admirals realized they no longer controlled their own systems, internal infighting erupted, accusations flew, and entire sectors declared independence, some even appealing to Earth for mediation, which Hale allowed selectively, sending envoys who spoke plainly and firmly about humanity's requirements and expectations, emphasizing that any retaliation would be met with decisive response. And as neutral observers watched this unfold, the galaxy began to understand a truth that had been invisible for centuries. Humans did not fight like other species, because humans anticipated, prepared, and endured in ways that no ancient power had reckoned with. And the very design of human strategy was psychological as much as tactical, exploiting pride, fear, and overconfidence in ways that left opponents trapped by their own assumptions. And during this period, Hale personally supervised the disarmament of orbital platforms that had once threatened entire planetary surfaces, ensuring that humans did not appear as conquerors but as protectors, while simultaneously using cyber operations to neutralize hidden caches of warheads, sabotage reactors, and erase historical war records that the Varkesh might have used to inspire revenge. And each act of restraint strengthened humanity's reputation, making the species both feared and respected, a combination that few others had ever managed. And as the Empire fractured, Hale turned his attention to diplomacy with the newly independent sectors, not as a conqueror demanding loyalty, but as an equal offering security and trade, setting standards for conduct, dispute resolution, and mutual defense. And while many alien diplomats were reluctant at first, the clear demonstration of human capacity to punish or protect shifted their calculations, resulting in treaties that stabilized regions previously racked by rebellion, and the ripple effect extended to the Council itself, which convened emergency sessions to reconsider humanity's place in galactic hierarchy, because one human admiral had not only ended a 1,000-year empire, but had rewritten the rules of interstellar engagement, forcing every species to acknowledge that underestimation was no longer safe, and that the humans, once mocked as primitive, had leveraged patience, ingenuity, and discipline to ensure that their arrival in galactic politics was definitive, permanent, and unassailable. As months passed after the collapse of the Varkesh Central Command, Admiral Hale initiated what historians would later call the Demonstration Campaign, a series of carefully calculated maneuvers designed to show the galaxy not just that humans could destroy a 1,000-year empire, but that they could do so with precision, foresight, and minimal loss, because Hale understood that perception shaped reality, and that if species believed humans were both patient and relentless, they would act cautiously for generations. And so human fleets moved into contested systems, appearing at hyperlanes previously thought impassable, intercepting smugglers and pirates with surgical strikes, disabling weapons installations without harming civilians. And when alien governments protested, claiming violations of sovereignty Hale replied with meticulously documented proof that humans were acting to prevent escalation, demonstrating capability while signaling restraint, and each engagement reinforced the growing mythos surrounding humanity, as news feeds, sensor records, and eyewitness accounts showed a species capable of orchestrating battles on a scale no empire had previously imagined, while simultaneously preserving life where possible. And inside the fractured Varkesh territories, governors attempted to rally support by claiming humans had only succeeded because the empire had grown soft. But every attempt backfired, as newly freed systems recounted stories of human intervention that had saved worlds and prevented chaos, turning former subjects into allies and neutral observers into advocates. And Hale carefully monitored these developments, coordinating fleet movements, cyber operations, and diplomatic overtures, so that momentum always remained in humanity's favor without overextending, because he knew the greatest risk after victory was complacency or misperception. And in parallel, human scientific teams deployed experimental technology long deemed unstable, including adaptive shield generators and gravitic manipulator drones, integrating them seamlessly into operational fleets to provide asymmetric advantages that confounded alien commanders, while data harvested from prior Varkesh engagements allowed human strategists to anticipate enemy responses with uncanny accuracy. And as the demonstration campaign reached its zenith, human forces enacted a final show of strategic brilliance by linking multiple independent operations into a single, coordinated offensive that neutralized all remaining Varkesh command nodes simultaneously, leaving fleets adrift, communications severed, and supply chains in ruin. And when the Varkesh Emperor finally acknowledged defeat, he did so not in triumph but with reluctant clarity, transmitting a message to Earth recognizing humanity as a dominant galactic power, a statement that reverberated through the Council, where every elder species debated the implications, because one human admiral had achieved what no prior coalition could, reshaping the balance of power across multiple arms of the galaxy without ever appearing to overreach. And Hale's measured approach ensured that humanity emerged not as conquerors, but as the ultimate guarantors of stability, a lesson in strategy, patience, and the devastating effectiveness of underestimation corrected too late, confirming once and for all that humans were a species whose capabilities defied every expectation imposed by the elder powers. With the Varkesh Empire effectively neutralized, Admiral Hale turned his attention to consolidating humanity's position and shaping the new galactic order, because victory was meaningless without stability, and the galaxy needed to understand that humans did not seek dominion but deterrence, and so fleets were stationed at critical hyperlane choke points not as occupiers, but as monitors, ensuring that no resurgence of imperial aggression could occur, while simultaneously humanitarian teams assisted worlds long oppressed under Varkesh rule, restoring infrastructure, stabilizing economies, and training local security forces in defensive operations. And every action was documented, transmitted, and archived for public scrutiny, reinforcing perception of humans as disciplined, strategic, and principled. And as neutral civilizations observed these methods, they began sending delegations to Earth, some to learn, others to negotiate treaties, and Hale personally oversaw diplomatic channels, crafting a network of alliances that prioritized mutual security over territorial claims, because he understood that long-term deterrence depended not only on military capability, but on trust and reputation. And while the galaxy slowly accepted this new reality, Hale continued to refine human strategies, running simulations that integrated lessons from the Varkesh collapse, identifying vulnerabilities in emergent powers, and preparing contingencies to prevent future overreach. And as he did so, the myths surrounding his earlier campaigns grew, with reports circulating that one human admiral had orchestrated the fall of an empire from a distance, manipulated entire fleets without being seen, and neutralized ancient warships without mass destruction, a legend amplified by alien observers who had witnessed precision of human operations and could not reconcile it with their prior assumptions. And the Varkesh themselves, fractured into independent systems, continue to serve as proof of humanity's unique capabilities, with former generals and governors either aligning with human directives or quietly retreating into obscurity, unable to mount coherent resistance. And within the Council, Hale's methods forced elder species to reconsider centuries of policy, acknowledging that humans operated on principles and timelines that were fundamentally different, because patience, adaptability, and an understanding of psychology had allowed one species to outmaneuver another that had ruled for a millennium. And as the final stabilizations took place, human fleets conducted synchronized demonstrations of capability, showing that the species could project power across multiple sectors simultaneously while maintaining minimal collateral impact, leaving a clear message that deterrence was absolute, discipline was unmatched, and underestimation of humanity was no longer an option. And through it all, Hale remained methodical, calm, and unseen, a figure whose quiet decisions had not only ended an empire, but redefined what it meant to be powerful in a galaxy that had once dismissed humans as primitive. In the aftermath of the Varkesh collapse, Admiral Hale oversaw the final phase of humanity's intervention, a period historians would later call the era of demonstrated supremacy, because it was not enough to have defeated a 1,000-year empire. The galaxy needed to witness that humanity's strength, strategy, and discipline were enduring. And so Hale coordinated simultaneous operations across dozens of sectors, ensuring that any lingering pockets of resistance were neutralized, communications and supply lines secured, and former Varkesh worlds integrated into a network of mutual security, without loss of life where possible, while human scientists and engineers worked to stabilize star systems destabilized by centuries of imperial exploitation, repairing orbital habitats, restoring planetary infrastructure, and providing guidance to newly sovereign governments. And through careful diplomacy, Hale established councils composed of representatives from multiple species, including humans, to arbitrate disputes, enforce trade standards, and monitor security, creating a framework that ensured that no single power could again rise unchecked. And as neutral species observed these measures, they realized that humanity's influence was not born of conquest or greed, but foresight, competence, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. And the legend of one human admiral grew into a cautionary tale across the galaxy, told in council chambers, academies, and military academies alike, emphasizing that underestimating humanity could lead to collapse, humiliation, and the loss of entire empires. In the quiet moments aboard the Resolute, Hale reflected on the strategies, sacrifices, and timing that had allowed a species once dismissed as primitive to reshape interstellar politics, knowing that his purpose had never been glory but survival and deterrence. And as he transmitted the final orders for the decommissioning of temporary occupation fleets and the formal recognition of newly independent sectors, he understood that the galaxy had learned a lesson no single council session could teach. Humanity was not to be measured by its past technological limitations or its size, but by its ingenuity, patience, and capacity to adapt and endure. And in that realization, the 1,000-year empire that had once dominated 6 spiral arms became a memory, a warning etched into galactic consciousness, as humans quietly returned to their worlds, fleets standing down, not in defeat, but in measured restraint, leaving behind a galaxy that would never again call them primitive. And with that, Admiral Jonathan Hale completed his mission, not with fanfare or celebration, but with the calm certainty that one species had irrevocably proven its place among the stars, ensuring that the underestimation of humanity would remain a mistake no civilization would ever dare repeat.